The other position we've talked about running back and receiver, but that I think is really key for 2024 is tight end. That we're just sort of in a tight end golden age. The way that I've been saying it in some of my shows and some of my writing over at my newsletter is I don't think we've ever had in fantasy football, and I've been playing since the late 90s, 7 profiles as strong as the top 7 tight ends this year. And that would be Kelsey and Kittle and Andrews are all a part of that group. Those are the guys that have been there for the long time. They're the old guard. Typically speaking, the elite tight ends are good for multiple years. Those guys are all there. But you had Laporta and McBride, who were just true breakouts last year. Laporta has one of the best rookie seasons that you've ever seen at the position. Trey McBride takes until year 2, has kind of a weak year 1, but year 2 is just massive. He was actually better than Laporta in targets per out run, in yards per target, in yards per out run.
You scared off by that at all with the Marvin Harrison Jr. stuff, or no?
I'm not. I actually think it's
good. You think it's going to drive the price down? Oh, you actually think that the efficiency numbers can potentially go up, and the offensive situation is going to be better.
Exactly. So one of the fun facts about Harrison and about rookies, even for the rookie receivers that have been smashes recently, both Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, both of them individually averaged at least 2 targets per game more in their second season than their massive breakout rookie seasons, which is to say that you don't walk in the door day 1 as a rookie receiver, even if you get drafted high and even if you're a superstar, and earn the target share that you're ultimately going to earn. It's going to take Harris. He's going to be good, but I actually think it's hard for him to be a dominant number 1 wide receiver immediately from day 1. And maybe he will be. And then if he is, I actually just think it's like, okay, now you have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce in the prime of the Chiefs years. Cause I think McBride's that good. I mean, he was so good last year, 2+ yards per out run. But I do think actually this is a great setup where Harrison's going to draw some coverage. It's going to, like you said, it's going to help McBride's efficiency in some ways. There's some other interesting players in that passing game as well. I don't want to just completely ignore, but I really do think it's going to be these 2 guys, and that McBride can be, I'm going to probably rank him as my tight end 1. He's going tight end 3 right now in drafts, but I'm really excited for McBride. And then I'm still leaving a candle on for Kyle Pitts for some of the reasons we talked about, the potential for a lot more passing volume, a lot more route share.
Yeah. We talked about it a couple weeks ago on this show. We did our NFC North or NFC South lingering questions from last year. And I was the one I wanted to dig into was how good are these trio of young skill guys? Like, are the candles a little too bright in the way that we're projecting them moving forward? With the first 2 guys, with Bijan and Drake London, it was like immediately after watching one game, it was like, we're set. Like, those guys are just good. With Pitts, it was like, you can just see the change in usage and the change in what type of profile he has as a player helping him. And I think that's also from a football perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, I'm curious about this because I honestly think the best way to get the most out of him as a football player is for him to be more of a traditional tight end in the sense that not as an inline player, but more as a slot player than an outside player. And that's going to make his ADOT go down. But I also just think that's what he's best at. I don't think he's a good outside the numbers vertical player. And that's probably a dirty thing to say for his fantasy value potentially. But I think overall, having him be a little bit more of a middle of the field or underneath yak sort of option is actually the best way to get the most out of him. This offense will do that. And that's why I think that your lighting of that candle is justified, because I think there are a lot of things that potentially line up to get the best version we've seen of him so far.
One of the big reasons I'm still so excited about him is what does a hit look like statistically, because he does have this really high ADOT. I love this take because it would be great if we could get some more of the higher catch rate, lower ADOT, easier to complete plays. But the reality is, even if they move that direction as you're talking about, he still has the athleticism and the profile to have some vertical targets, which not all tight ends do. And that's the part of it where it's like, what do you get when you're right? We started talking about outliers and those things. Like maybe Pitts isn't very good, and a lot of people have been burned by him and they don't want to do it again. For me, the way I look at it is like, if you're wrong, you're going to lose, because he's going to be, statistically speaking, he's going to put up numbers that rival what receivers can do. Like the yards per reception can be so high. He had the 1,000-yard season as a rookie, and he did it on, it was not that many catches. I don't have the number. I'm going to pull it up really quick, but I think it was like 68. Yeah, it was 68 receptions. I personally
wouldn't be swayed by the rookie year numbers, because I think a lot of the rookie year production was in the realm that we're talking about, where he was an outside the numbers vertical player. I would think of Kyle Pitts and what he can be in this offense. I would look at Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua usage over the last couple of years. You don't need vertical production from those two guys necessarily to have them put up monster numbers. This is a lot of in-breaking stuff over the middle of the field. And I actually think that's where he's best, and that's where he wasn't used enough. I would implore you, go look at the yards per route run numbers and the EPA per target numbers with him lined up in the slot last year versus him lined up out wide. It's night and day. His yards per route run as an outside player were bad, like actively bad, even among tight ends. But if you put him in the slot, I think he's in the top 5 among all tight ends, and that's with a really negative set of circumstances with the quarterback, with the offense, all of that kind of stuff. So,
and his catchable target rate was just atrocious. So that's where, like, I'm still putting a little bit of like, maybe his outside numbers are so bad because they couldn't just get him the ball out there, down the field out there.
He's just not that type of player to me. I really don't think he is. I think it's so tempting to look at him and see him with the vertical speed that he has and just say like, oh, he can play like a receiver, so we should use him that way. But it's one of those things like Jurassic Park. Just because you could doesn't mean you should. Like, that's just not the way to think about this. And I watched some of the things he did on benders and in breakers and even corner routes from the slot. That's what I'd be most excited about from a vertical perspective. If you think about Cooper Kupp's vertical production in like 2021, it's all corner routes from condensed splits. So there's some vertical production and some vertical opportunities, but it's not outside the numbers go balls. Like, that's not what I want to see, because I don't think that's the best way to use him.
I love this. And I mean, you're still describing a higher ADOT type of player than most tight ends, because a lot of them are like 5 ADOT, and you're not talking about a deep threat, but you're talking about, we can still get the type of, so ADOT tends to correlate with yards per target. We can still get the type of yardage efficiency that could lead to, but I love what you're talking about here. You're getting me more excited about it because the target numbers, the reception numbers could go up with more of those types of plays, like you're saying. I mean, you're comparing him to some high volume receivers. So that's fun.
Well, if we're talking about that as concentration, right? And if his role can be a blend of receiver and tight end, but not in the way that it was over the last couple of years, in a way that actually leads to higher efficiency. If the targets are concentrated to him and Drake London, but it's in a much higher volume, higher efficiency offense, we can get the best of both worlds. You can get what you got over the last couple of years in terms of workload on a per snap basis, but the efficiency can line up in ways that it didn't before, and the usage can actually line up with his strengths more than it did before. So I think there's absolutely a world where all of that stuff comes together in a way that it hasn't even when he was a rookie.
And if people aren't following why we're comparing him to the Rams so much, it's because Zach Robinson comes over from the Rams. He was a passing game coordinator for the Rams last year. He's the new offensive coordinator. So it's really fun to think through Drake London and Kyle Pitts as the new Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, right? Like, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's the type of offense you'd expect them to run. It's not just pulled out of nowhere.
We went off on a tangent here, but so how are you thinking about the way that those top 6-7 tight ends and the quality of that position, which is a severe left turn from where it had been over the last couple of years? How does that kind of change your thinking for when you want to draft these guys and how you want to approach the position?
So just a few years ago, I was really into Pitts going into year 2 after he had 1,000-yard season as a rookie, a young rookie. And that's another exciting thing about Pitts. He's still very young. He's 23 years old right now. But he was going very high in the top 3. And I argued that year that the top 3 tight ends had a chance, because the rest of the position was fairly weak, had a chance to really gap the field in a way that gives you such a positional advantage in fantasy that you wanted to be seeking that. That did happen. Both Andrews and Pitts didn't, for a variety of reasons, didn't do great. Travis Kelce was the one who was the tight end one, who everyone knew was the tight end one. He scored about 100 fantasy points more than every other tight end in that season. He was the linchpin for good fantasy builds, taking one of these elite tight ends. It's a little different when there's 7, right? Because multiple guys could have great seasons. You have these young guys that are breaking out. You have the veterans who are very strong. George Kittle's going at tight end 7 out of this group. That guy's a star, right? But he's going there for some of the reasons we talked about with like Tank Dell, where it's like you can't project. We talked about it with Ayuk. You can't project him for enough volume, but we know he's an efficiency superstar. You go look at his efficiency every year and all the different alignments. I mean, he's just an absolute monster. We just know that about him. He is getting up there in age, and people I think are a little bit concerned about the injury history, some of those things. But he's going tight end 7. When George Kittle's going tight end 7, I think that tells you about all you need to know, because he had a very good season last year. He had one of the better seasons of his career. He wasn't falling off or anything. My approach is that you're probably not going to be able to replicate whichever of these guys hits. They're not all going to hit because tight ends do have a higher bust rate. There's always more intriguing tight ends on draft day than actually pan out. And that's an important thing to remember. It's tricky, but it's an important thing to recognize. You might miss, but if you think through how the position is going to play out, if you take a late round tight end, even if that hits to some degree, he's probably not going to have a ceiling that can match what these top 7 can do, and whichever of them hits. And the odds that all 7 of them don't hit is pretty tricky. That's a hard bet to make. It's a parlay that's a lot longer of a shot. You need all of these dudes to bust for different reasons. Everything we just said about Pitts has to not happen, but also Kittle and Kelsey have to break down due to age, and Andrews in the new offense needs to not be good, and McBride and Laporta's breakouts need to not translate, and Kincaid's the other one that we haven't mentioned. The offense looks like he's the one from a talent perspective I'm maybe the most concerned about, because we haven't really fully seen it from the talent, like the per route run numbers and that. But their offense is shifting in a way that he could just really rack up volume. And that's so key at tight end. I mean, he's going to basically be another guy who kind of plays receiver, more like slot receiver, a big slot, but he's going to run a lot of routes, and they need somebody to catch a lot of passes. They lost their top, their first and third target earners, Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, and replaced them with, lesser talents, we'll say. Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman has some question marks in his prospect profile. Some interesting names for sure. Deep into the wide receiver room there. It could be very split, but it seems like Kincaid's like the one guy who could really rack up some volume there for them. So there's a lot of things you would have to have go wrong for you to not be chasing a lot of points at tight end. And for that reason, I like making the bet on an early tight end, especially because, again, we talked about this with the running backs earlier, but you have to think about opportunity costs when you draft, and we've kind of talked through like a draft plan a little bit. I don't love taking a lot of running backs early, because the opportunity cost is these really good wide receivers and some of these elite tight ends as well. But it's also because you can replicate the scoring. Where does running back scoring come from? You can actually hit on late round running backs. It's not easy, but they can score a ton. Raheem Mostert, Kyron Williams were the examples I gave a little bit ago. And there are players like that at the running back position that can rise in a major way, their value from draft day into what they actually are during the season. What I'm trying to argue here is it's tougher for a tight end to do that. And so I would like to use some of my higher draft capital on an elite tight end in most leagues and in most drafts, and take a swing, even though there's some bust risk, on one of those 7 guys being special, along with those, with some depth at receiver, and then try to hit on running backs later that could also be big hits, like this year's Mostert or this year's Kyron. So I think those things are symbiotic. They play, those strategies play well together. I'm a big fan of the elite tight end strategy this year.